You know, there's a feeling that most of us carry around without ever naming it. A quiet suspicion that sits just beneath the surface of your daily life. The sense that you don't quite belong here, that somehow, somewhere along the way, you became a stranger in your own existence. You look out at the world through your eyes, and everything seems to be happening out there. Separate, distant, not quite yours. Other people seem to fit. They seem to know where they belong. They seem to move through life with a kind of ease that feels foreign to you. But you feel like a guest who overstayed their welcome at a party you were never quite invited to. And here's what's peculiar. This feeling isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's actually evidence that something is trying to wake up. But what exactly wakes up? And why does it happen to some people and not others? Why can't you simply decide to have this experience the way you decide to learn a language or pick up a skill? These questions have puzzled mystics and philosophers for thousands of years. And the answers, when they come, tend to arrive not through the mind, but despite it. You see, throughout human history, in every culture, in every era, in the most unexpected circumstances, people have reported something peculiar happening to them. Mystics in caves, housewives doing dishes, businessmen on trains, children staring at clouds, prisoners in cells, farmers in fields. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't check your credentials. It doesn't care whether you've read the right books or practiced the right techniques or belonged to the right tradition. It simply happens. Like catching a cold, like hiccups in the middle of a sentence, like sneezing when you didn't feel it coming. One moment you're going about your ordinary business, worried about ordinary things, tangled up in ordinary problems. And the next moment, everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world has been turned completely inside out. And here's what makes it so interesting. You can't make it happen. You can meditate for 40 years and never touch it. You can follow every instruction in every spiritual manual ever written and come up empty. You can fast and pray and chant and prostrate yourself before every altar on earth, and it might never come. And then someone who's never heard of enlightenment, who's never sat in lotus position, who's never chanted a single mantra, who couldn't tell you the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism, will have it fall into their lap like an apple from a tree they didn't even know was there. This tells us something rather important about the nature of consciousness itself. It can't be fully domesticated. It can't be controlled or scheduled or manufactured on demand. The mind, for all its cleverness, cannot grab hold of this experience any more than your teeth can bite themselves or your eyes can see themselves directly. The techniques, the practices, the disciplines, they might prepare the ground. They might make the soil fertile, but they cannot make the seed sprout. That happens on its own schedule, according to its own mysterious intelligence. So what do we do with this? Do we just wait passively, hoping that enlightenment might strike us like lightning? Not exactly. But before we can understand what to do, we need to understand what this experience actually is. What happens when it occurs? What changes? What shifts? Let me start by describing something that you've almost certainly felt, even if you've never had what anyone would call a mystical experience. Think about your morning routine. You wake up, and before you even open your eyes, there's already a sense of separation. The alarm clock is out there, demanding something from you. The day ahead is out there, full of tasks and obligations that feel imposed upon you. Even your own body can feel like something separate, something you have to drag out of bed and force into motion. You shower, and the water hits your skin, and there's you feeling the water, and there's the water being felt. Two separate things. You eat breakfast, and there's you consuming the food, And there's the food being consumed. Everything is divided. Subject and object. Observer and observed. Inside and outside. You drive to work, and there you are, inside your car, looking out through the windshield at a world that's passing by. You're in here. The world is out there. And between you and it, there's this invisible barrier, this sense of fundamental separation. This is so normal that we don't even question it. This is what we call being a functioning adult. This is sanity, supposedly. But what if this very normalcy is a kind of trance, a collective hallucination that we've all agreed to participate in? You see, there's a sense that most of us carry around, a feeling so familiar that we barely notice it anymore. It's the feeling of being a stranger in the world, of being somehow separate from everything else. You look out through your eyes at a universe that seems to exist entirely outside of you. The trees, the sky, other people, the ground beneath your feet, the stars at night. It's all out there. And you're in here, trapped inside this body, this skull, this skin. You are, as it were, a little person who lives behind your eyes, peering out at a world that is fundamentally not you. And this creates a peculiar kind of loneliness, a loneliness that has nothing to do with whether other people are around. You can be at a party surrounded by friends and still feel it. You can be in the arms of someone who loves you and still feel it. You can be in the middle of the most beautiful landscape on earth and still feel it. This subtle background sense that you don't quite belong here, that you're a visitor, a guest, an outsider looking in. You might not think about it consciously. You might never have put it into words, but it's there. This feeling of being an isolated ego, encased in a bag of skin, confronting an external universe that is indifferent at best and hostile at worst. A universe that will eventually kill you. A universe where you have to fight for your place, secure your position, defend your territory, accumulate enough resources to feel safe. This is the normal human condition. This is what we consider sane. But in the mystic experience, something extraordinary happens. This boundary, this wall between inside and outside, between self and world, between you and everything else, it simply dissolves. Not through effort, not through understanding, not through any deliberate act. It just goes. Like a soap bubble that existed one moment and simply isn't there the next. No violence, no struggle. Just a quiet vanishing of something you'd taken for granted your entire life. And when it goes, when that barrier evaporates, you make a discovery that is impossible to convey adequately in words. But let me try anyway. You discover that the world you've been looking at your whole life isn't something separate from you at all. It isn't out there. It isn't external. It isn't other. It's you. The trees are you. The sky is you. The ground beneath your feet is you. The air you're breathing is you. The sounds you're hearing are you. The people walking past are you. The clouds drifting overhead are you. The whole magnificent, terrifying, beautiful, heartbreaking panorama of existence is you. Not in some poetic or metaphorical sense. Not as a nice spiritual idea that you're supposed to believe in. But in the most literal, immediate, obvious way imaginable. The universe isn't something you observe. It's something you are. Think about that for a moment. Your entire life, you've believed that you were a small creature living inside a vast cosmos. A tiny speck of consciousness floating through an enormous mechanical process that doesn't care whether you exist or not. You've felt like an accident. A brief flicker of awareness in an otherwise dead and meaningless universe. A candle flame that will soon be snuffed out, leaving no trace that you ever were. But in this experience, that whole picture inverts. Completely. Utterly. Irreversibly. You realize that you aren't in the universe. The universe is in you. Or more precisely, you and the universe are the same process, the same unfolding, the same becoming. There was never any separation to begin with. The boundary you perceived was always imaginary, a trick of the mind, a necessary illusion for practical purposes that you mistook for fundamental truth. The world that seemed so foreign, so alien, so indifferent to your existence, suddenly reveals itself as your own body, your own self, extended infinitely in all directions. You haven't gone anywhere. Nothing external has changed. The trees look the same. The sky looks the same. Your hands look the same. But you recognize them differently. You recognize them as yourself. Like looking in a mirror and suddenly realizing that what you thought was a stranger was your own reflection all along. You've been looking at yourself your entire life and calling it other. You've been touching yourself and calling it world. You've been speaking to yourself and calling it conversation. The stranger in the world was never a stranger at all. The stranger was you, pretending not to recognize yourself. Now, along with this comes something else, something even more difficult for the ordinary mind to accept, something that will make every practical bone in your body want to protest. There's a perception that arises, unbidden, unwilled, that everything is exactly as it should be. Not just the pleasant things, not just the beautiful things, not just the moments of joy and connection and love. Everything, every event that has ever occurred, every choice that has ever been made, every tragedy, every mistake, every failure, every moment of cruelty and stupidity and waste, every war, every famine, every betrayal, every heartbreak, every death, all of it. It all fits. It's all part of a pattern so vast, so intricate, so perfectly arranged that the word harmony barely scratches the surface. Nothing is out of place. Nothing should have been different. Nothing was ever truly wrong. Now, I can already feel the resistance to this idea, and that resistance is completely understandable. More than understandable. It's healthy. Our practical intelligence, our everyday mind, survives by making distinctions. This is good. That is bad. This is right. That is wrong. This helps me. That hurts me. This should happen. That shouldn't. Without these categories, how could we function? How could we make decisions? How could we navigate a world full of genuine dangers and real consequences? And so when someone comes along and says everything is perfect exactly as it is, the logical mind rebels. It should rebel. What about suffering? What about injustice? What about children who are abused? What about innocent people who are murdered? What about diseases that ravage bodies? What about all the terrible things that happen to people who don't deserve them? You're telling me those are part of some perfect pattern? I understand the objection. I feel it myself. But here's what's crucial to grasp. This isn't a philosophical position. This isn't a theory that someone sat down and constructed to make themselves feel better about life. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing, or any attempt to whitewash reality or escape from difficult truths. It's a direct perception, an immediate seeing, like the difference between believing that fire is hot because someone told you and actually putting your hand in a flame. You don't conclude that everything fits. You don't reason your way to it. You don't convince yourself through argument. You see it. You experience it. It reveals itself to you with a clarity that makes your normal way of seeing feel like looking through a dirty window that you didn't know was dirty until someone cleaned it. And here's the strange thing, the thing that surprises most people when they hear about it. This seeing doesn't make you passive or indifferent. It doesn't make you stop caring about suffering or stop working to reduce it. It doesn't make you sit back and say, well, Everything's perfect. So why bother doing anything? If anything, it makes you more effective. Because you're no longer fighting against the fundamental structure of reality. You're no longer wasting energy on resistance and resentment and the desperate wish that things were other than they are. You're working with life rather than against it. You're moving as it moves. You're dancing with a partner instead of wrestling with an enemy. The compassion doesn't decrease, it increases. Because you recognize suffering as your own suffering. You recognize others as yourself. How can you be indifferent to your own pain? But I want to be very careful here. Because this is precisely where so many people go wrong. This is where the spiritual path becomes treacherous. This is where seekers stumble into traps that can keep them stuck for years, even decades. There is a tendency, a very understandable tendency, to try to manufacture this experience, to try to think your way into it, to repeat affirmations and mantras, to tell yourself that everything is one, that everything is perfect, that you are the universe, to adopt the conclusions of the mystic experience without having the experience itself. This is like trying to make the tail wag the dog. You see, when you try to convince yourself of something, you're implicitly admitting that you don't actually believe it. If you truly saw that everything was perfect, you wouldn't need to remind yourself. You wouldn't need affirmations. You wouldn't need to prop up your conviction with mental effort. You wouldn't need to repeat it every morning, like a medication you have to take. The very act of trying to believe reveals the doubt underneath. It's like someone who constantly tells everyone how happy they are. You don't quite trust it. You sense something is being covered up. And this creates a kind of spiritual pretense that is, in many ways, worse than honest confusion. At least the confused person knows they're confused. At least they're in touch with their actual experience. But the person who has adopted spiritual conclusions without spiritual experience, they're in a peculiar kind of hell. They're trying to feel something they don't feel. They're trying to see something they don't see. They're trying to force their actual experience into a mold that doesn't fit. And underneath it all, there's a constant, exhausting effort to maintain the pretense, to keep up appearances, to not admit, even to themselves, that the emperor has no clothes. You end up with people walking around saying all the right words, maintaining all the right postures, but with a hollowness at the center, a sense that something isn't quite authentic, because it isn't. The great religious and philosophical traditions of the world didn't start with someone deciding to believe something comforting. They didn't start with a committee drawing up a list of nice ideas that would make life more bearable. They started with someone having an experience so overwhelming, so undeniable, so totally transformative, that they couldn't help but talk about it. The experience came first, then the words, then the attempts to describe it, then the teachings, then, unfortunately, the dogmas and institutions and arguments about who had the right interpretation and who was a heretic and who should be in charge. But at the root of all of it, beneath all the accumulated doctrine and ritual and organization, was something that happened, not something that was thought, not something that was decided, not something that was believed, something that arose from nowhere, uninvited, like hiccups, like sneezing, like catching the measles. And when it arises like that, out of nowhere, unbidden, unwilled, it carries an authority that no argument can shake. You don't believe in it. You don't hope it's true. You don't try to convince yourself. You know, with a certainty that isn't based on evidence or logic, but on direct contact with something more real than anything you've ever experienced before. Something that makes your ordinary waking consciousness feel like a dream you've been having. And this, finally, is waking up. This is why people who have this experience often feel compelled to share it. Not out of ego, not to be special or admired or followed, but because when you see something this clearly, when you taste something this profound, staying silent feels almost impossible. It's like the way a flower opens. Have you ever watched a time-lapse video of a flower blooming? The petals unfold with a kind of inevitability that has nothing to do with hesitation or choice. The flower doesn't wonder whether it should open. It doesn't debate the pros and cons. It doesn't worry about what the other flowers will think. It doesn't ask permission. It simply opens because that's what flowers do when the conditions are right. Or think about a baby chick pecking its way out of an egg. It doesn't contemplate the philosophical implications of leaving the shell. It doesn't weigh the risks and benefits. It doesn't formulate a plan. Something inside it knows its time, and it pecks. That's all. The unfolding happens of its own accord. The person who has the mystic experience often shares it for the same reason. Not because they decided to become a teacher or a prophet or a spiritual authority. Not because they wanted disciples or fame or influence, but because the experience itself naturally expresses. It flows outward. It can't help but communicate itself. It would be stranger not to speak than to speak. Of course, this is where things often go wrong. The person speaks, and others listen. And the listeners, not having had the experience themselves, do what humans always do. They take the words and turn them into beliefs. They take the living truth and package it into doctrines. They take the spontaneous insight and organize it into rituals and requirements and hierarchies. And before you know it, what started as a direct encounter with the infinite has become another religion, another set of rules, another source of division between those who are in and those who are out, another thing to argue about, another reason to feel superior or inferior, another institution to maintain and defend and propagate. But that's not the fault of the original experience. That's what happens when you try to preserve lightning in a bottle. The lightning was real. The attempt to contain it inevitably distorts it. You can point at the moon, but if people start worshiping your finger, that's not the moon's fault. Now, there's one more thing I want to touch on. Something that might seem strange at first. Something that might even seem inappropriate. When you have this experience, when you see the world this way, even briefly, you develop a rather unusual relationship with ordinary life. You start to look at the world around you, at all the busy, serious, striving people, and something happens. You find it funny. Not in a cruel way. Not from a place of superiority. Not the laughter of mockery. But genuinely, warmly, almost affectionately funny. All the rushing around, all the desperate accumulation of money and status and security, all the worrying about tomorrow and regretting yesterday, all the fighting and competing and comparing, all the treating of life as if it were a problem that needs to be solved, or a test that needs to be passed, or a competition that needs to be won. It's like watching children play a game with absolute seriousness, convinced that it's the most important thing in the world, while you can see that it's just a game. You don't want them to stop playing. You don't think they're foolish for caring about it. You're not above them, but you can see it for what it is. And what you see is that most people are running around in a kind of panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond simply being alive. As if life itself weren't enough. As if there must be some goal, some purpose, some destination that would finally justify the journey. As if you need a reason to exist. Look at all the serious faces on the morning commute. Look at all the worry lines etched into foreheads. Look at all the tension held in shoulders and jaws. Everyone acting as if something terrible will happen if they don't keep running, keep striving, keep achieving, keep becoming. But becoming what? Achieving what? Running toward what? If you ask most people what they're ultimately after, what they really want at the bottom of all their wanting, they'll say something like happiness, peace, contentment, a sense of meaning or fulfillment or completion. But these aren't things you can achieve. They aren't destinations you can arrive at. They aren't prizes you can win. You can't accumulate your way into peace. You can't compete your way into contentment. You can't think your way into happiness. And this is what the mystic sees. This is what makes it all seem so funny. Not cruel funny, tender funny, compassionate funny. The mystic sees something simpler, something so obvious that it's almost embarrassing to say it out loud. Something so plain and so clear that it seems ridiculous that anyone could miss it. And yet, almost everyone does. The meaning of life is just to be alive. That's it. That's the whole secret. The meaning of breathing is to breathe. The meaning of seeing is to see. The meaning of hearing is to hear. The meaning of existing is to exist. There's no hidden agenda, no final exam, no cosmic checklist that you need to complete before you're allowed to feel okay. No achievement that will finally make you worthy. No transformation that will finally make you enough. You are the universe experiencing itself. Right now, in this moment, with these eyes, and this breath, and this heartbeat. The achievement you've been seeking isn't somewhere else. It isn't in the future. It isn't waiting for you after you've accomplished enough, or become enough, or understood enough. It's here. It's always been here. You just didn't notice because you were too busy looking for it somewhere else. You were looking in the future for something that can only exist now. You were looking outside for something that can only be found inside. You were looking for home while standing in your living room. And perhaps the greatest joke of all, the one that makes the mystics smile when they look at the world, is this. Everyone is already home. Everyone is already whole. Everyone is already exactly what they've been seeking. The stranger who felt lost in the world was never actually lost. The lost feeling was just another part of the pattern, another thread in the tapestry, another note in the music. The feeling of being a stranger was the universe playing hide and seek with itself. Hiding from itself so it could have the joy of finding itself again. Pretending to be lost so it could experience the wonder of being found. Let me say this another way, because it's easy to hear these words without really hearing them. You have been looking for home. You have been searching for a place where you belong, a state where you finally feel at ease, a moment when the anxiety dissolves and you can simply rest. You've imagined that this home exists somewhere in the future, after you achieve enough, after you understand enough, after you become a different, better version of yourself. But home isn't a destination. Home is what you are. Home is what you've always been. The searching itself was home, searching for itself. The longing was home, longing for its own recognition. The stranger was home, pretending not to recognize its own address. You didn't need to go anywhere. You didn't need to become anything. You just needed to stop long enough to notice what was already here. What has always been here. What could never be anywhere else. This is the cosmic joke. The treasure you've been seeking was in your pocket the whole time. The stranger you thought you were was the universe pretending to be lost, so it could experience the joy of being found. And when you find yourself, when you recognize what you've always been, there's a kind of laughter that bubbles up. Not because anything is wrong, not because the world is absurd in a nihilistic sense, but because you finally see how perfect it all is, how perfect it's always been. Even the getting lost, even the feeling like a stranger, even the desperate search for meaning, even the years of confusion and suffering and longing, all of it, every bit of it, part of coming home. The game of hide and seek is over now. Not because you won. Not because you figured it out. Not because you became spiritual enough, or wise enough, or good enough. But because you stopped hiding. You stopped pretending. You stopped being a stranger to yourself. And in that stopping, in that simple recognition, something flowers open. You were always the one you were looking for. Welcome home.